A woman publicly humiliated by her husband vanishes. Years later, she returns unrecognizable and a multimillionaire. When everyone discovers who she is, her ex-husband goes pale. But what she does next stuns the entire town. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, comment below where you're watching from so we can bring you more videos like this. The sweet scent of spiced apple cider mixed with the warm aroma of cinnamon as the sky over Havenwood Creek painted itself in a deep orange hue. Colorful flags fluttered in the warm October breeze, and the lively sound of a fiddle filled the air between laughter and cheerful chatter. It was the annual Harvest Festival, a tradition that brought the small southern town together in a collective embrace. Among the game booths and food stands, 32-year-old Lena Miller nervously adjusted her floral apron over her simple dress. Her brown eyes, always attentive to detail, checked for the 10th time that the homemade pies and cookies were perfectly displayed at her small stand. Her delicate fingers straightened the handwritten tags. Lena's famous apple pie, salted caramel, pecan tart, classic lemon bars. Maybe today he'll notice, she thought, moistening her dry lips. Her heart raced when she saw Mark, her husband, approaching with determined strides through the crowd. The owner of the biggest hardware store in town, he walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile reserved only for important clients, Mark held a cup of mulled cider in his hand. You could feel the tension in the air, the kind of electricity that precedes a storm. Some people had already stopped to watch, as if they sensed the drama about to unfold in the middle of the town square. "So, sold anything today?" he asked, without even glancing at the meticulously decorated pastries. The falsely casual tone didn't fool anyone, least of all Lena, who had known every nuance of that voice for 12 years of marriage. "I've sold almost half, Mark," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "People are really loving the half." The interruption was accompanied by a dry laugh that cut through the air like a knife. "You invested almost $500 in ingredients and you're happy about selling half? That's why your little baking dream will never take off." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. Not here. Not in front of everyone. The conversations around them gradually subsided, and the sound of the fiddle seemed distant now. "Mark, can we talk about this at home?" she whispered, feeling her face burn with shame as she realized several people were watching the scene. "Why? So you can put me off again with this ridiculous dream of yours?" His voice grew louder with each word. "You know what your problem is, Lena. You can't even bake a decent pie." The cup of cider in his hand was thrown onto the table, spilling the amber liquid all over the pastries she had so carefully prepared the night before. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the sound of the cider drops dripping from the tablecloth to the dirt ground. The world around Lena seemed to slow down. She saw the looks, some of pity, others of embarrassment, a few of silent indignation. Mrs. Marlene, the florist, put a hand to her mouth. Father Anthony looked away, flustered. Mark's sister Christina tried to hide a small smirk at the corner of her lips. The tears came, as inevitable as rain after suffocating heat. They streamed silently down Lena's face, mixing with the sweat of the hot afternoon. There was something in the taste of those tears, perhaps the bitter flavor of public humiliation, or maybe, though she didn't yet know it, the first taste of freedom. Have you ever felt like your entire world was crumbling? Like every dream you carefully nurtured was torn from your hands and stomped on before your very eyes? What would you have done in Lena's place? Would you have fled, or would you have stayed and confronted him? Let us know in the comments below. The festival went on, of course. Personal tragedies rarely interrupt public celebrations. The fiddle started playing again, conversations resumed, and Mark walked away toward his friends as if nothing had happened. But for Lena, nothing would ever be the same. Hours later, when the night had already covered the town with its starry cloak, Lena sat alone on the edge of the bed she shared with Mark. He still hadn't returned from the festival. The vanity mirror reflected a woman who seemed to have aged years in just a few hours. Her eyes, normally bright and alert, were red and swollen. She opened the nightstand drawer and took out a small, yellowed envelope. Inside, an unopened pregnancy test, bought 3 weeks earlier when her period was late. She hadn't had the courage to take it, fearing a positive result as much as a negative one. A baby would mean a permanent bond to a marriage she now realized had become a prison. The absence of a baby would mean she had no more excuses to postpone the changes she knew were necessary. Do you know that moment when all the pieces click into place and suddenly you see the complete picture with crystal clarity? For Lena, it happened when her fingers touched a small card hidden under the envelope. It was the contact information for Mrs. Geneva, her 70s neighbor, who, weeks before, had offered to help her after witnessing a particularly heated argument between the couple. "When you're ready, my dear," the elderly woman had said, with eyes that seemed to see through her soul. "Come see me. I have some savings put aside for an emergency, and I can't think of a bigger emergency than yours." At the time, Lena had thanked her with a sad smile, never imagining she would actually consider the offer. But now, with the taste of tears still fresh on her lips and the cider stain on her apron as a reminder of the public humiliation, something had changed. Slowly, like someone waking from a long sleep, Lena got up and took a small suitcase from the back of the closet. Her movements were calm, almost mechanical, as if she were watching someone else act. She packed a few clothes, her personal documents, a small box with the few pieces of jewelry she had inherited from her mother, and, after a moment of hesitation, the still-sealed pregnancy test. Have you ever felt that absolute certainty that comes in life's decisive moments? That feeling that despite all the fear and uncertainty, you are finally on the right path? That's what Lena felt when she closed the suitcase. There was no more room for doubt. She left her wedding ring and a small notebook where she had written, for years, recipes and ideas for the bakery she dreamed of opening. She didn't leave a note. Words seemed inadequate, insufficient to express everything she felt. Besides, what word could capture the complex whirlwind of emotions that consumed her? It wasn't just sadness or anger, but a mix of disillusionment, exhaustion, fear, and, surprisingly, hope. The early morning was silent when Lena gently knocked on the back door of Mrs. Geneva's house. The elderly woman answered promptly, as if she had been waiting for that moment. "You don't have to explain anything, my dear," she said, leading Lena inside gently. "I saw everything today in the square. Some things don't need words." Sitting at the kitchen table, under the soft light of an old lamp, the two women, separated by more than 4 decades in age, but united by an understanding that only women who have suffered can share, made plans. Mrs. Geneva had saved her entire life. For a rainy day, as she used to say, and for Lena, a deluge was falling. "My daughter lives in Atlanta," Mrs. Geneva explained. "She has a small restaurant in the Kirkwood neighborhood. She needs someone who knows how to cook for real, not these young people who only know how to heat up microwavable food." Lena felt a wave of gratitude so intense that new tears welled up in her eyes. But these were different from the ones she had shed in the square. These were tears of recognition, of genuine human connection. "How can I ever thank you, Mrs. Geneva?" The elderly woman smiled, revealing wrinkles that told stories of a long life, not without suffering. "Thank me by being happy, my dear. And one day, when you find someone who needs help like you do now, reach out. That's how the world should work." Before the first ray of sun touched the horizon, a bus left the Havenwood Creek bus station, taking Lena to Atlanta. In her purse, in addition to her documents and the money Mrs. Geneva had insisted she take, was the still sealed pregnancy test. She would take it when she arrived in Atlanta. Whatever the result, she would face it with the new strength she had discovered within herself. Can you imagine what goes through a woman's mind as she leaves everything she knows behind, taking only a small suitcase and newfound courage? As the bus drove through the night, Lena looked out the window at the distant lights of the town she was leaving. She didn't know if she would ever return, but she knew for sure that when and if she did, she would be a completely different person. The sun began to rise as the bus entered the main highway. The first golden rays lit up Lena's face like a silent promise of better days. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the warmth of the sun on her skin. There was something almost sacred about that moment, the end of one life and the beginning of another. In Havenwood Creek, Mark and Lena's house remained silent. He was still asleep, unaware that upon waking, he would find only a wedding ring on the bed and an empty space in the closet. Unaware that his life had also changed forever that night. And so, as a new day dawned, two lives followed completely different paths. One, still trapped in old patterns, appearances, and the arrogance that masks insecurity. The other embarking on a journey of self-discovery, rebirth, and, though she didn't yet know it, forgiveness. What no one could have predicted at that moment. Not Lena on her bus to Atlanta, not Mark in his ignorant sleep, nor the residents of Havenwood Creek, who would soon be gossiping about her disappearance. Was that this story, which began with bitter tears at a harvest festival, would end in a way that no one could ever imagine? But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, Lena looks out the bus window, her eyes reflecting the sunrise. There is fear in her heart, of course, but there is also something more powerful. Hope. And hope, as they say, is the last thing to die. Don't miss out on what happens next. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with the next part of this incredible story. Part 2. The Taste of Sweet Beginnings. The sunrise in Atlanta had different colors than the ones Lena knew. The rising sun struggled to make itself known among the skyscrapers, painting the sky a pale pink that quickly gave way to the gray of pollution. Sitting at the window of the simple room she had rented in a boarding house in the Kirkwood neighborhood, Lena watched the city awaken, noisy, impatient, so different from the quiet Havenwood Creek. 6 days had passed since her arrival, 6 days of adaptation, sleepless nights, and staring at the still-sealed pregnancy test on the dresser. Today, however, something had changed. Do you know that feeling that you are finally ready to face a truth you've been postponing? That's exactly what Lena felt when she woke up that morning. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the test package. 2 minutes later, which seemed to stretch for hours, the confirmation that part of her already knew. She was pregnant. Silent tears streamed down her face as her hand rested gently on her still flat belly. Inside, a life was beginning to form, a life that would depend entirely on her choices, on her strength. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the little being who couldn't yet hear her. "Mommy is going to build a beautiful world for you." In that moment, something crystallized inside Lena. The fog of doubt and fear that had accompanied her from Havenwood Creek began to dissipate, giving way to a clarity of purpose she had never experienced before. It wasn't just for her anymore. It was for both of them, now. The restaurant of Betty, Mrs. Geneva's daughter, was just a few blocks from the boarding house. It was a small but cozy establishment, specializing in homemade food that attracted workers and families from the neighborhood. On her first day, Lena had introduced herself timidly, her southern accent giving away her origins, her eyes still red from the tears she had shed during the trip. Aunt Geneva told me about your situation, Betty said at that first meeting. A sturdy, middle-aged woman with an easy smile and perceptive eyes. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. Here, what matters is the present and the future, not the past. Have you ever met people like that? Those who seem to understand exactly what you need without you having to explain? Betty was one of those rare people, and her kindness was the first genuine ray of sunshine in Lena's new life. Now, with the confirmation of her pregnancy, Lena walked to work with a different, more confident stride. The restaurant was still closed when she arrived, but Betty was already there, preparing dough for the day. "Morning, sweetheart," the older woman greeted, noticing something different in Lena's eyes. "Something happen?" Lena took a deep breath, smelling the aroma of yeast and tomato sauce that filled the kitchen. "I'm pregnant, Betty." The words hung in the air between them. Lena didn't know what to expect. Disapproval, concern, pity. But what she received was a warm hug that smelled of rosemary and maternal affection. "Congratulations, girl. A new life inside you. What a wonderful gift. But I'm scared," Lena confessed, allowing herself to express the vulnerability she usually kept to herself. "How am I going to raise a child alone in a city I barely know, without money, without—" "Shh," Betty interrupted gently. "One worry at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, and your new life won't be either. Let's start with the basics. You have your health, you have a job, and now you have an even stronger reason to move forward." The following months passed in a blur of adaptation and discovery. Lena's body changed day by day, keeping pace with the changes in her mind and spirit. In the mornings, she worked in the restaurant kitchen, learning culinary secrets that Betty generously shared. In the afternoons, when things slowed down, she took over the cash register, watching with an attentive eye every detail of the business's operation. You know how some people have a natural gift for noticing details that go unnoticed by most? Lena had always had that ability. But in Havenwood Creek, under the constant shadow of Mark's disapproval, she had never valued this talent. Now, however, she was beginning to realize how valuable her observational skills could be. That's how, in her 4th month of pregnancy, with a small bump already visible under her apron, Lena noticed something interesting. Customers were always commenting on the lack of homemade dessert options in the neighborhood. "You know what would be perfect after this wonderful pot roast?" A regular customer, an elderly lady, commented. "A good homemade pudding, the kind that jiggles like gelatin when you touch it. Or a carrot cake with chocolate frosting," her husband added, a man with a gray mustache. "Haven't had a decent one in years, since old man Greg's bakery closed down." That night, in her room at the boarding house, Lena couldn't sleep. Her mind was buzzing with ideas, recipes, and possibilities. She took a new notebook, not the one she had left behind in Havenwood Creek, but one she had bought with her first paycheck, and began to write down her ideas. When the sun came up, she had the outline of a proposal in her hands. "Homemade desserts?" Betty repeated when Lena presented her idea the next morning. "To sell in the restaurant?" "Yes," Lena confirmed, with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. "I started to notice that a lot of customers mentioned the lack of homemade dessert options in the neighborhood. We could start with a few simple recipes, puddings, cakes, pies, and see how people react." Betty looked at Lena with an expression that mixed surprise and pride. "You really are paying attention to everything, aren't you?" "Well, I'm willing to try it. We have the space in the kitchen, and I trust your talent. Let's start with 2 or 3 options and see how it goes." And so was born the dessert section of Betty's restaurant, which in just a few weeks would become as popular as the main dishes. Lena's sweets, made with simple ingredients but with a care and affection that you could taste in every bite, began to attract a specific clientele: People who came just to try the new creations from the girl from out of town. Have you ever experienced that feeling of being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to do? That's what Lena felt when she saw the looks of satisfaction on customers' faces as they tried her desserts, when she heard their sincere compliments, when she realized that something that came from her hands had the power to bring joy to others. In her 6th month of pregnancy, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, forwarded by Menta Geneva from Havenwood Creek. It was from a law firm in Atlanta, informing her that Lena had been named the sole heir of a great-aunt who had recently passed away in Portugal. The woman, who had left the U.S. decades earlier after a difficult divorce, had accumulated a small fortune with a winery in the Douro Valley. "That's impossible," Lena murmured, rereading the letter for the 3rd time. "I barely remember this aunt. My mom mentioned her sometimes, but I never met her. Sometimes life surprises us in the most unexpected ways," Betty mused as they had tea together in the restaurant kitchen after closing. "Maybe she was watching your life from afar. Or maybe, who knows, the universe is conspiring in your favor." The inheritance wasn't a life-changing fortune, but it was significant enough to open up possibilities that had once seemed impossible. After consulting with an accountant recommended by Betty, Lena decided to invest part of the money in a small apartment in the Kirkwood neighborhood itself, ensuring a home for herself and the baby on the way. With another part of the money, she did something that surprised even herself. She proposed a small partnership to Betty to expand the dessert section of the restaurant into a dedicated space. "A dessert cafe attached to the restaurant," she explained, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Customers could have dinner here and then go next door for desserts and specialty coffees. And we'd also serve people who just want a sweet treat without necessarily having dinner." Betty, who had already been considering ways to expand the business, saw the immediate potential in the idea. "You have a business mind, girl? Who knew?" "Well, let's do this together then. Your skill with sweets and my experience with the business. We make a good team." And so, when her 8th month of pregnancy arrived, Lena wasn't just waiting for a baby. She was also waiting for the birth of a new business. The small commercial space next to the restaurant was rented, and renovations began. Betty insisted that Lena slow down her work in the kitchen, focusing on planning the new space and developing a unique dessert menu. On quiet nights, alone in her new, simple but cozy apartment, Lena would talk to the baby in her belly while flipping through magazines about decor and gastronomy. "See, little one? Mommy is building something special for us. You're going to grow up seeing that it's possible to start over, that it's possible to turn pain into sweetness." It was in these moments of intimacy with her unborn child that Lena allowed herself to think about Havenwood Creek, about Mark, about the life she had left behind. Not with bitterness or resentment, but with a kind of distant gratitude. Gratitude for the strength that pain had given her, for the path that had brought her here. Have you ever realized that sometimes you need to completely remove yourself from a situation to see it clearly? That's what happened to Lena. As the months passed and her new life took shape, she began to understand patterns she hadn't been able to see before, to grasp dynamics that had shaped her marriage, and, most importantly, to realize her own worth in a way she had never before experienced. In her 9th month, as summer was giving way to the gentle autumn, the dessert cafe was almost ready for its grand opening. Only a few final details were missing when the first contractions began. "It's time," Betty announced, who was with her choosing the dishes for the cafe, when Lena went pale with a particularly strong contraction. "Let's go to the hospital now." 12 hours later, in the first minutes of a clear April morning, Lily was born. 7 pounds of pure miracle, with her mother's curious eyes and a tuft of dark hair. When the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, Lena felt as if the entire world fit into that moment, into that embrace. "Hello, my little one," she whispered, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world. We have an incredible journey ahead of us." 3 weeks later, with Lily snuggled in a sling against her chest, Lena cut the ribbon for the grand opening of Sweet Beginnings, the dessert cafe that would become, in the years that followed, the first step of a gastronomic empire that no one, not even she, could have predicted at that moment. As she smiled at the small crowd that had gathered for the opening, Betty, the restaurant's loyal customers, neighbors, and newfound friends, Lena felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. Those seeds of renewal, planted in soil, watered with tears, were now beginning to sprout, and the harvest promised to be sweet, much sweeter than the bitterness she had left behind. Don't miss out on what happens next. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with the next part of this incredible story. Part 3. The Return of the Prodigal Daughter. The first rays of sun filtered through the linen curtains of the room as Lena awoke to the crystalline sound of Lily's laughter. 3 years had passed since the early morning her daughter came into the world, transforming forever not only her body, but her entire existence. "Mommy, wake up! It's time to make pie!" exclaimed the girl with dark curls, bouncing on the bed with the inexhaustible energy only children possess. Lena smiled, opening her arms to embrace that little hurricane of joy. Lily was the sun in her universe, intelligent, observant, and with a smile capable of melting any resistance. At 3 years old, she already showed the same attention to detail as her mother, noticing the smallest changes in their routine, questioning everything with a ravenous curiosity typical of her age. "Morning, my love," Lena murmured, inhaling the scent of children's shampoo in her daughter's hair. "Yes, it's pie day, but first, breakfast." Have you ever noticed how mornings have a special flavor when they're shared with someone you love? For Lena, those morning moments with Lily, preparing breakfast together, the girl on her special stool, helping her mom, were instances of pure happiness, small treasures she collected with the same care she used to keep the colorful pebbles her daughter found at the park. Lena's life had changed dramatically in those 3 years. Sweet Beginnings, which had started as a small cafe attached to Betty's restaurant, had become a success that surpassed all expectations. After the first year, with stable finances and Lily already toddling everywhere, Lena made a bold decision to open a second location in Midtown, a busy neighborhood with a more affluent clientele. The expansion was a calculated risk, made possible by the part of the inheritance she had saved and the trust she had earned in the local market. Betty, always her safe harbor, encouraged the move. "You've got the Midas touch, girl," her friend said when she visited the new store for the first time. "Who saw you arrive here, shy and scared, and who sees you now, a successful businesswoman?" Lena just smiled, embarrassed by the praise. She had never seen herself as a businesswoman, only as a woman determined to build a secure future for her daughter. Now, with Sweet Beginnings turning 3 and a third location about to open downtown, Lena sat at the kitchen table of her apartment, watching Lily devour pancakes with strawberry jam. The simple apartment of the early days had given way to a duplex penthouse in a secure building, with a special room for Lily, decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. "So we never forget to dream," as Lena had explained when she installed the tiny lights. But not everything that morning was smiles. While her daughter was distracted with breakfast, Lena discreetly checked her email on her tablet. There, between messages from suppliers and management reports, was an email that made her heart race. It was an update from Robert Simmons, a financial consultant specializing in small businesses whom she had hired about a year ago. Have you ever felt that mix of anxiety and curiosity when opening an important message? That's exactly what Lena experienced when she clicked on the email. Robert didn't know her full story. She never shared complete details of her past with anyone, but he understood the importance of her requests. As requested, here is the update on the economic situation of Havenwood Creek, with a special focus on the hardware and construction sector, the message began. The scenario remains challenging for traditional businesses in the region. The arrival of a major home improvement chain in the neighboring town 18 months ago has redirected consumers who are looking for variety and competitive prices. Small businesses that have not modernized are facing an estimated drop in revenue of between 30% and 40%. The report continued with specific data on Mark's Home and Hardware, without ever mentioning his name. Lena had been careful in her requests, only asking for information about reference establishments in the sector. According to Robert, the situation was worrying. Outdated inventory, lack of a digital presence, resistance to implementing modern management systems, all culminating in a significant loss of market share. Lena closed her tablet, feeling a knot form in her throat. It wasn't revenge she was seeking by monitoring the situation in Havenwood Creek. It was... what, exactly? She couldn't fully explain it herself. Maybe it was just a way to stay connected to her roots, to understand the place she came from before deciding if she would ever return. "Mommy, can I take my new drawing to show Aunt Betty today?" Lily's voice brought Lena back to the present. "Of course, my love. I'm sure she'll love it." As she helped her daughter brush her teeth and get dressed, Lena's mind wandered between the brilliant present she had built and the past that, despite the distance, still exerted a strange pull on her heart. The night before, after putting Lily to sleep, she had done something she had been doing regularly for the past 6 months. She transferred a considerable amount of money to Mrs. Geneva's account, with specific instructions on how to use it. Part of the money was to anonymously pay off old debts Lena had at the local pharmacy and grocery store. Small amounts that had once seemed like mountains, but that she could now clear with a single click. Another part was for a contract with the local florist for a monthly delivery of arrangements to her parents' graves, who had passed away years before her departure from Havenwood Creek. "It's the least I can do," she had explained to Mrs. Geneva in one of her rare phone calls. "I don't want anyone in town to think I've forgotten where I came from or the people who helped me." Have you ever felt that need to close cycles, to reconcile with the past before completely moving forward? That's what Lena was seeking with those small gestures. It wasn't just about paying off financial debts, but emotional ones too, a way of saying goodbye to what had been, while simultaneously honoring her origins. The day went by in the usual business bustle. The third Sweet Beginnings store would open in 2 weeks, and 1,000 details required her attention. Lena, who initially personally supervised every aspect of the production, now delegated much of the operational work to a carefully trained team. Her focus had expanded. It was no longer just about making perfect desserts, but about creating a complete experience, a brand that symbolized comfort and quality. At the end of the afternoon, while reviewing the uniforms for the new team in her office at the Midtown location, Lena received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Miller, this is Anthony Jones from the New Horizon Real Estate in Havenwood Creek." Lena's heart almost stopped. It was the first time in 3 years that someone from her hometown had contacted her directly, besides Mrs. Geneva. "Yes, how can I help you?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Well, I got your contact through Mrs. Geneva. She mentioned you might be interested in a commercial property that just came on the market. It's the old Perez warehouse on Main Street. As you might know, it's an excellent, strategic location." Lena sank into her chair, while the realtor continued to describe the qualities of the property. She hadn't specifically asked Mrs. Geneva for this information, but the astute older woman seemed to have read her mind. "I'll think about it, Mr. Jones," she finally replied. "Can you send me the details by email? I promise to review them carefully." After hanging up, Lana remained motionless for several minutes, looking out her office window at the street traffic. Was she really considering this? Going back to Havenwood Creek, not just in thought, but physically. Establishing a business there? The idea, which until then had seemed like a distant fantasy, began to take concrete shape. It wouldn't be a return to the past, but an extension of her present. To bring a little of the success she had achieved to her hometown, to create jobs, to contribute to the local economy that, according to Robert's reports, was facing difficult times. And there was also Lily. As she grew up, the girl was beginning to ask questions about her origins, about her mother's family, about the father she had never known. How long could Lena postpone these conversations? How long could she protect her daughter from the complete truth about her story? That night, after putting Lily to sleep, but not before telling her two stories, their sacred ritual, Lena sat on the balcony of her penthouse, a glass of red wine in her hands, contemplating the city lights. Atlanta, which 3 years earlier had received her as a frightened stranger, now seemed familiar and welcoming. There, she had built her new life, found her voice, and rediscovered her strength. Have you ever felt that sometimes, to truly move forward, you need to revisit your past? It was this understanding that came to Lena on that starry night. Havenwood Creek wasn't just the place of her heartache. It was also the soil where she had been born, where her parents were buried, where she had taken her first steps. It was a part of her, for better or for worse. The realtor's email arrived while she was still contemplating the horizon. Attached were not only details about the warehouse, but also a broader report on the town's economic situation. Mark's business was mentioned directly this time. It was on the verge of bankruptcy, with accumulated debts and customers migrating to the more modern competition in the neighboring town. A whirlwind of emotions filled Lena as she read that information. It wasn't satisfaction at her ex-husband's difficulty, as she might have expected to feel years ago. It was something more complex, a mix of understanding, sadness for the reality of a man who hadn't known how to adapt to new times, and, surprisingly, a genuine desire to change that situation. That same night, she made a decision. She called Robert Simmons and made a request that would surprise anyone who knew her story. She wanted detailed information about the financial situation of Mark's Home and Hardware, including a full evaluation of its debts, assets, and potential for recovery. "I'm considering an acquisition," she explained, her voice firm despite the internal turmoil. "Not out of interest in the hardware sector, but as part of a larger plan." In the weeks that followed, while supervising the opening of the third Sweet Beginnings store, Lena plunged into meticulous planning. What had started as a vague idea transformed into a concrete project. To expand her business to Havenwood Creek, not only with a branch of her successful bakery, but with a local development plan that would include the restructuring of struggling traditional businesses. "It's crazy," she confessed to Betty when she finally shared her plans. "To go back to the place I ran from, to invest in the business of the man who publicly humiliated me." "It's not crazy," Betty replied, with the quiet wisdom that always characterized her. "It's the closing of a cycle. You're not running anymore, Lena. You're choosing to go back on your own terms, and that makes all the difference." On a sunny afternoon in December, exactly 3 years and 5 months after her silent departure, Lena signed the documents that set her boldest plan in motion. She acquired, through a debt recovery company, a large part of the debts of Mark's Home and Hardware. At the same time, she bought the old Perez warehouse, with plans to transform it into the largest Sweet Beginnings location yet. Lily, now an eloquent little girl of almost 4, watched her mother with curiosity as she organized documents in her home office. "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" Lena smiled, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "Yes, my love. We're going to see a very special place for Mommy. A place where I was born and grew up, where your grandparents lived. It's called Havenwood Creek. Is it far?" "Not too far. It's a small town, very different from Atlanta. It has a beautiful square in the center, with an old church and a gazebo where wonderful festivals happen." Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement at the prospect of an adventure. "And are we going to stay there for a long time?" Lena hesitated for just a moment before answering. "For as long as it takes, my love. For as long as it takes to complete a story that began a long time ago." As Lily hopped off her lap to get her toys, eager to decide which ones to pack for the trip, Lena watched her daughter with a mix of overflowing love and serene determination. The path she had chosen would not be easy. She knew she would face ghosts, curious glances, and difficult questions. But she was ready. For the first time in her life, she felt completely in control of her destiny, of her choices. She was no longer the frightened young woman who had fled one summer morning, taking only a small suitcase and a pregnancy test. She was an accomplished woman, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother. And now she was about to add a new chapter to her story, one that no one, not even she, could have predicted 3 years earlier. This story is getting more shocking with every turn. What do you think will happen when Lena returns to her hometown? What do you think her ex-husband's reaction will be? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Part 4. The Confrontation. The sun was already setting in the west when Lena's car passed the faded sign that read, "Welcome to Havenwood Creek, Land of Hospitality." The open windows let in the unmistakable aroma of wet earth and eucalyptus trees that lined the road, a scent that instantly transported Lena back in time, erasing the nearly 4-year distance that separated her from that place. In the back seat, Lily had finally fallen asleep after hours of incessant questions about their destination. Her dark curls framed her serene face, so much like her mother's, that she was almost a miniature photograph of Lena at the same age. "We're here, sweetheart," Lena whispered, more to herself than to the sleeping girl. "We're home, but would it really be home?" This question echoed in her mind as her imported car moved slowly down Main Street, attracting curious glances from the few pedestrians on the sidewalks late that Friday afternoon. Havenwood Creek seemed smaller than in her memories, quieter, as if time had slowed down in the small town, while it had accelerated in her own life. Do you know that strange feeling of returning to a place that was once intimately familiar, only to discover that both the place and you have changed irrevocably? That's exactly what Lena experienced as she parked in front of the Grand Havenwood Creek Hotel, the only establishment in town that offered reasonable accommodations for visitors. "Can I help you with your bags, ma'am?" a young bellhop offered, looking with admiration at the luxury car. "Thank you," Lena replied, getting out of the vehicle and discreetly adjusting the sunglasses that hid her eyes. She wasn't ready to be recognized yet, not before she settled in and prepared Lily for the whirlwind that was sure to come. The hotel room was simple but comfortable, a 2-room suite that Lena had reserved for the first few weeks until the renovation of her parents' old house, which she had secretly bought through an intermediary, was complete. She carefully transferred her still sleeping daughter to the bed, covering her with the unicorn blanket she never left behind. Standing by the window that offered a privileged view of the town square, Lena observed the gazebo where, almost 4 years earlier, she had experienced the moment of humiliation that had transformed her life. The same square where now, ironically, she planned to open the most ambitious branch of Sweet Beginnings. "Am I ready for this?" she murmured to her reflection in the window glass. A reflection that showed a woman very different from the one who had left. Her hair, once long and shapeless, now framed her face in an elegant bob with caramel highlights. Her body, once hidden beneath shapeless clothes, now showed defined curves in a pantsuit that screamed success and self-confidence. But her eyes were the biggest transformation. No longer downcast or evasive, but direct, determined, aware of their own worth. "Mommy," Lily's sleepy voice interrupted her reflections. "Where are we?" Lena sat on the edge of the bed, stroking her daughter's curls. "Remember I told you about the town where Mommy was born? We're here, in Havenwood Creek. Tomorrow, I'll show you the square, the church, and all the special places from Mommy's childhood." The girl's eyes, identical to her own, sparkled with excitement. "Are we going to see Grandpa and Grandma too?" The innocent question hit Lena like an invisible punch. During the years in Atlanta, she had explained to Lily that her grandparents were in heaven, but the girl didn't yet fully grasp the concept of death. As for her father, Lena had postponed that conversation, saying only that he lived far away. Now, in Havenwood Creek, those simplified explanations would no longer suffice. "Grandma and Grandpa are in heaven, remember? But tomorrow we can visit the place where they rest and bring them some beautiful flowers. As for your father," Lena took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "He lives here in this town, and we're going to meet him soon. Have you ever felt the weight of a truth that has been postponed for too long?" Lena felt that weight now, pressing on her chest as she tried to explain the complex situation to her daughter in terms a child of almost 4 could understand. The first morning in Havenwood Creek dawned bright, with that intense blue that only a small-town sky seems capable of displaying. After breakfast in the room, Lena decided it was time to show her face. She dressed Lily in a floral dress, combed her rebellious curls, and after a brief hesitation in front of the mirror, opted for a simple but elegant look. Impeccable cut jeans, a white silk shirt, and a single accessory. A delicate gold necklace with a miniature bakery pendant. A gift from her team when sweet beginnings turned 2. "Let's go see the town, my love." Hand in hand, mother and daughter left the hotel, walking slowly along the sidewalk of Main Street. It didn't take long for the first looks of recognition to appear. An elderly lady at the pharmacy door dropped the package she was holding. The barber stopped cutting hair, his mouth open in surprise. A group of teenagers stopped talking, pointing discreetly. "Lena! Lena Miller!" The voice came from a middle-aged woman leaving the bakery. It was Regina, an old school friend who had always been kind to her. Lena smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. This was the first real test, the first official recognition of her return. "Hi, Regina, long time no see." The woman approached, her eyes wide as she alternated between Lena's face and little Lily, whose resemblance to her mother was undeniable. "My God, it's really you. Everyone talked when you left. And this is my daughter, Lily," Lena replied simply, lightly squeezing the hand of the girl who watched the stranger with curiosity. The news spread through the small town with the speed that only rumors in close-knit communities can achieve. Before they even completed their walk to the town square, Lena could feel the stares multiplying, the conversations halting, the poorly disguised whispers. Some greeted her shyly, others just watched from afar, incredulous. In the square, where the memories of the Harvest Festival still haunted her thoughts, Lena allowed Lily to explore the gazebo, keeping a watchful eye on her. It was there, sitting on one of the freshly painted wooden benches, that she received the first visit that really mattered. "I knew it was true. When I heard the rumors this morning, I knew it had to be you." Lena looked up to find the wrinkled face and kind eyes of Mrs. Geneva. The older woman, more stooped than in her memories, leaned on a simple cane. Mrs. Geneva," Lena whispered, getting up to hug the woman who had made her escape possible years ago. "How are you?" "Alive," the older woman replied with a mischievous smile, which at my age is quite an achievement. Her eyes moved to Lily, who was now running toward her mother. "And this must be the little one who was in your belly when you left." Lena nodded, formally introducing her daughter to the woman who, without ever having met her, had already profoundly impacted her life. Lily, always sociable, was soon talking animatedly with the older woman about the pigeons in the square and the colors of the flowers in the beds. "You came back to stay?" Mrs. Geneva asked when the girl moved away again to explore. "Yes," Lena confirmed. "I bought my parents' old house, and I'm planning to open a branch of my business here. Sweet Beginnings is a network of bakeries I started in Atlanta." The older woman nodded, as if she already knew all of this, and she probably did, through the discreet communications they had maintained over the years. "And what about him? You know things aren't going well for Mark, don't you?" Lena took a deep breath before answering. "I know everything, Mrs. Geneva. In fact, it's part of the reason I came back." The older woman's eyes shone with an understanding that went beyond the words spoken. "You were always special, dear. I always saw that in you, even when you couldn't see it in yourself." The afternoon was a blur of visiting familiar places that now seemed strangely new through Lena's eyes. She showed Lily the school where she had studied, the church where she had been baptized, the ice cream shop that, surprisingly, still had the same faded sign from 2 decades ago. Have you ever revisited places from your childhood and been surprised by how much smaller and simpler they seem than in your memories? For Lena, every corner of Havenwood Creek brought that feeling, a mix of familiarity and strangeness, like looking at an old portrait of herself and barely recognizing the person in it. After lunch at the hotel and a much-needed nap for Lily, Lena decided it was time to visit the location that would become the new Sweet Beginnings branch. The old Perez warehouse, strategically located on the corner of the square, was an imposing building from the turn of the century, with thick walls and large windows that promised perfect natural light, accompanied by the realtor, who didn't hide his astonishment at the transformation of the former resident, who was returning as a prosperous businesswoman. Lena explained her vision for the space, while Lily explored the empty corners of the large room. "I want to keep the original facade, just restoring the details. Inside, we'll modernize it completely, but with respect for the history of the place, this exposed brick wall will stay. And here," she pointed, visualizing what didn't yet exist. "Here we'll have refrigerated display cases for the desserts, with marble counters," and her voice abruptly fell silent when the warehouse door opened and a familiar male figure entered, stopping just inside the threshold. Time seemed to freeze as Lena and Mark stared at each other for the first time in almost 4 years. He had changed. His hair, once with just a few gray hairs at the temples, was now significantly whiter. There were new wrinkles around his eyes, and his body, once robust and imposing, seemed slightly diminished, as if the weight of recent years had literally compressed his frame. "So it's true," he finally said, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "You came back." The realtor, sensing the tension in the air, mumbled something about checking the backyard and quickly disappeared through a side door. Lena thanked him mentally for the moment of privacy, while she called Lily closer with a gentle gesture. "Yes, I'm back," she replied simply, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "To stay?" Mark's eyes moved slowly from Lena's face to the little girl beside her, and there they stayed, wide with a mixture of shock and gradual understanding. The resemblance between mother and daughter was undeniable, but there were also hints of him in the shape of her nose and the line of her chin. "This is—" He couldn't complete the sentence. "Lily," Lena answered, placing a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "My daughter?" Have you ever seen someone be hit by a truth so powerful that it seems to physically unbalance them? That's how Mark reacted, taking a step back, leaning against the nearest wall, his face drained of color. "My daughter." The words came out as an incredulous whisper. "You were..." I suspected when I left. I confirmed it shortly after. Lily looked curiously at the stranger who seemed so affected by her presence. "He's my daddy, Mommy! He's my daddy!" The innocent question, asked with the crystal-clear clarity that only children possess, echoed in the empty space of the warehouse. Lena felt it, and knelt down to be at her daughter's eye level. "Yes, honey, this is Mark, your daddy." The girl, with the disconcerting naturalness of childhood, took a step forward and held out her small hand in a surprisingly formal gesture. "Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Lily, and I'm almost 4. Mommy said you lived here." Mark seemed momentarily paralyzed, looking at the extended little hand as if it were something incomprehensible. Then, slowly, like someone approaching something precious and fragile, he knelt before the girl and accepted her handshake. "Hello, Lily," his voice choked. "I'm your dad." The moment suspended between the three of them, father, mother, and daughter, was interrupted by the return of the realtor, oblivious to the family drama that had just unfolded. Mark got up quickly, composing himself as best he could. "We need to talk, Lena," he said, already heading for the door. "Not here, not now, but soon." After he left, the air in the warehouse seemed lighter, as if an imminent storm had temporarily moved away. Lena took a deep breath, gathering the composure she had carefully cultivated over the years. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" Lily asked, always attentive to her mother's emotions. "Yes, my love," Lena replied, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Everything is exactly as it should be." That night, after putting Lily to sleep, Lena sat on the small balcony of her hotel room, watching the lights of the town square. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Robert Simmons, her consultant. "Debt acquisition process finalized. All documents will be sent to your lawyer tomorrow, as requested." Lena smiled, not with satisfaction at winning a power game, but with the tranquility of someone who was finally seeing all the pieces fit into a carefully crafted plan. Tomorrow, she would visit the hardware store, not as the submissive wife she had once been, but as a successful businesswoman, ready to offer not revenge, but something much more powerful and unexpected. A second chance. This is getting tense. Do you think Mark will accept Lena's proposal? Or will his pride get in the way? What would you do in his position? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Part 5. The Sweetest Revenge. The morning arrived with that soft mist that sometimes covered Havenwood Creek, enveloping the small town in a hazy embrace that would soon be dissipated by the rising sun. Lena watched the phenomenon from her hotel window while finishing her coffee, feeling the weight of the day ahead. In a few hours, she would be face to face with Mark at the hardware store, not as the insecure wife who had left 4 years ago, but as the businesswoman who was returning to propose a solution no one could have predicted. "Mommy, can I wear my blue dress today?" Lily's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I want to look pretty to visit Daddy's store." Lena's heart contracted at her daughter's innocence. In just 2 days, the girl had already assimilated the idea of having a father, something that until then had only existed in vague stories and simplified explanations. The naturalness with which she accepted Mark was only possible thanks to the purity of her childish heart, not yet sullied by resentment or hurt. "Of course, my love. You look beautiful in your blue dress." As she helped her daughter get dressed, Lena reflected on the meeting scheduled for that morning. The briefcase resting on the table contained all the necessary documents: financial reports, debt acquisition contracts, detailed restructuring proposals. All the practical aspects were carefully organized. What remained uncertain was how her heart would react when she was once again in that space that had once been a central part of her life. Have you ever meticulously prepared for a decisive moment, only to discover that no amount of planning is enough for the emotions it awakens? That's exactly how Lena felt when, hand in hand with Lily, she walked through the door of Mark's Home and Hardware just after 10 in the morning. The bell above the door announced her entry, producing that same familiar chime that populated so many of her memories. The interior of the store, however, was almost unrecognizable. The shelves, once always organized and well-stocked, now showed empty spaces and dusty products. The checkout counter displayed scratches and signs of wear that no one had bothered to fix. In the air hung a subtle odor of neglect, that peculiar smell of places that have lost their vitality. Mark emerged from the back office when he heard the bell, his face showing that he expected the visit, although perhaps he wasn't truly prepared for it. At his side, to Lena's surprise, was Christina, his sister, and Lena's former sister-in-law, the same one who had smiled discreetly during her humiliation in the square years ago. "Good morning," Lena said, keeping her voice firm and professional. "As we arranged by phone." Mark nodded, his eyes inevitably fixing on Lily, who was curiously watching the tools displayed in a nearby window. "My niece?" Christina's voice broke the tense silence, a mixture of disbelief and something more complex in her tone. "Yes," Lena replied simply, turning to her daughter. "Lily, remember I told you about your Aunt Christina? She's your dad's sister." The girl smiled, showing the same genuine friendliness she had displayed when meeting Mark. "Hi, Aunt Christina. I like your necklace. It looks like a star." The innocent comment seemed to unnerve Christina, who instinctively put her hand to the gold pendant on her neck, a gift that Lena knew well where it came from. It was a piece of jewelry that had belonged to Mark's mother, traditionally given to the bride when she married. A piece of jewelry that, by rights, should have been hers. "Can we talk in the office?" Mark suggested, breaking an uncomfortable moment. "Sueli can keep an eye on Lily here in the store." Sueli, a longtime employee who now seemed to be the only one left, smiled gently at the girl, offering to show her how the cash register worked. With Lily entertained, the three adults headed to the small office in the back of the store. The space was exactly as Lena remembered it. The same dark wood desk, the same organized folders on the shelves, even the same promotional calendar from a cement supplier on the wall, although now showing a different year. The only notable addition was a photograph of Mark and Christina together at a business fair, smiling side by side in a way that suggested more than a fraternal relationship. "You didn't have to come back," Christina began, barely containing the hostility in her voice. "We had everything under control here." Lena smiled slightly, placing her briefcase on the desk and carefully extracting the documents. "The numbers disagree with you, Christina. Mark's Home and Hardware is on the verge of bankruptcy. Debts to suppliers, back taxes, defaulted bank loans, not to mention the consistent drop in sales over the past few quarters." "How do you know all this?" Mark questioned, his face pale, contrasting with the rising flush on Christina's cheeks. "I've been monitoring the economic situation of Havenwood Creek for some time. Part of my job as a businesswoman is to identify investment opportunities." The word opportunity hung in the air like a silent accusation. Mark sat heavily in his chair while Christina remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. "What do you want, Lena?" he finally asked. "Did you come for revenge? To buy our debts? To completely destroy us?" Lena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that moment. 4 years earlier, that might have been exactly what she wanted, to see Mark humiliated as she had been, to watch the downfall of the empire he had built with such pride. But the woman who was there now wasn't the same one who had left one summer morning. "Actually," she replied calmly, "I came to propose a partnership." The shock on both their faces would have been almost comical under different circumstances. "A partnership?" Christina repeated, incredulous. "After everything?" "Yes, after everything," Lena confirmed, keeping her gaze fixed on Mark. "Including your affair, which began long before I left." The silence that followed was deafening. Years of secrets and lies crumbled with those simple words. Christina went pale, reaching for the nearest wall for support. You knew?" Mark murmured at last. "I found out a week before that harvest festival. That's why I was so vulnerable, so unable to defend myself, when you publicly humiliated me. What I didn't know at the time was that your entire family was aware. Your mother, your father, all of you part of a plan to get me to disappear discreetly." Lena kept her voice surprisingly controlled, as if she were narrating someone else's story. "What I discovered later, through Mrs. Geneva and other contacts, was how the situation deteriorated after I left. Your relationship went public a few months later, causing the scandal your mother had so feared. The business began to suffer when people connected the dots and understood what had happened to me. And then, when the local economy began to shift with the arrival of bigger competitors, you no longer had the community's respect to sustain your traditional customer base." Mark lowered his head, unable to face Lena's direct gaze. Christina, on the other hand, regained some of her aggressive composure. "And now you come back as the great savior to show off your money and your success?" Lena shook her head, pulling more documents from her briefcase. "No, Christina. I'm back as someone who understands that the past cannot be changed, but the future always offers new possibilities. I came back for Lily, so she can know her roots. I came back for myself, to close the cycles I left open. And yes, I also came back for Mark's home and hardware." "Why?" Mark's question came out as a near whisper. "Because I believe this company still has potential. With proper modernization, digital strategies, a debt restructuring, and new suppliers, it can be competitive again." Lena gently pushed the documents toward Mark. "My proposal is clear. I will cancel the acquisition of the debts, invest in the company's modernization, implement efficient management systems, and establish an integrated distribution network with other local businesses, including Sweet Beginnings, which I will open in 3 months. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of Lily's laughter coming from the store. "In exchange," Lena continued, her voice gaining firmness, "I demand non-negotiable conditions. First, the immediate and public end of your relationship. You can't," Christina began, but Lena interrupted her with a calm gesture. "I'm not dictating your personal lives. I'm establishing conditions for a business investment. If you prefer to maintain the relationship, I respect your choice, but then there will be no business agreement." "What else?" Mark asked, ignoring Christina's furious stare. "Mandatory family therapy for all of us, including Lily. Active and gradual participation in your daughter's life, building a healthy relationship, and a public commitment to a change in both your business and personal behavior." Mark looked at the documents in front of him for a long time, then at the photograph on the wall, and finally at the half-open door through which he could glimpse Lily playing innocently. "Why, Lena?" he asked again, this time his voice choked with emotion. "Why not just destroy us after everything we did?" Lena allowed herself a moment to truly consider the question. Why, after all? It would have been simpler, perhaps even more satisfying in the short term, to use her newfound power to repay the pain she had felt. "Because revenge only perpetuates the cycle of hurt," she finally replied. "And because I discovered, in the last 4 years, that true power is not in destroying others, but in building something better for everyone, including myself. Her words hung in the air like a revelation, not only for Mark and Christina, but perhaps even for herself. The crystallization of an understanding that had been maturing since she decided to return to Havenwood Creek. "I need time to think," Mark said. After a long silence, "You have until Friday," Lena replied, getting up and gathering her briefcase. "After that, the banks will execute the guarantees and it will be too late." As she left the office, she found Lily sitting on the counter, drawing with colored pencils, while Sueli watched her with a nostalgic smile. "She looks so much like you at that age," the employee commented. "She has the same way of furrowing her brow when she's concentrating." Lena smiled, holding out her hand to her daughter, who hopped animatedly to the floor. "It was good to see you again, Sueli. I hope we can work together again soon." As she left the hardware store, Lena felt a lightness she hadn't expected. She had faced her ghosts, spoken her truths, and offered a solution that few would immediately understand. The rest was in the hands of destiny, or rather, in the choices that Mark and Christina would make in the coming days. 3 days later, on a Friday morning, the town square of Havenwood Creek witnessed a scene that would become part of local folklore for decades to come. Under the same gazebo where Lena had been humiliated 4 years earlier, the central figures of that drama now came to an unexpected conclusion. Mark, visibly nervous but determined, shook Lena's hand in front of a small crowd of curious citizens, while cell phone cameras recorded the moment. Beside them, a lawyer held the newly signed documents that formalized the partnership. "I want to publicly thank Lena Miller," Mark declared, his voice amplified by a small microphone. "Not just for the investment that will save this company, but for the lesson in humanity I have received. I made serious mistakes in the past, deeply hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and now I have a chance to do things differently. From today on, our company will not only be a renewed business, but a symbol of how it's possible to rebuild from the ashes of our own mistakes." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some faces showed surprise, others skepticism. A few showed cautious approval. In the background, Christina watched the scene with an indecipherable expression before turning and walking away from the square. Her choice had been different from Mark's, and now she would follow her own path to another city. When it was Lena's turn to speak, she looked around, at the same trees, the same benches, the same sky that had witnessed her humiliation. But now everything seemed different, seen through the eyes of the woman she had become. "Havenwood Creek will always be my home," she said simply. "I left here to discover my strength, and I'm returning not to seek revenge, but to share what I've learned. Sweet Beginnings, which will be opening soon, will be more than a bakery. It will be a space for connection, for shared memories, for flavors that remind us that life, even in its most bitter moments, always holds the promise of future sweetness." Lily, who was watching everything with the comical seriousness that only children can maintain on formal occasions, suddenly ran to the center of the gazebo, pulling both Lena and Mark by the hands. "Are we a different kind of family now?" she asked, with the disconcerting simplicity of childhood. Lena and Mark exchanged a look, not of romantic love, which had been irretrievably lost, but of a new understanding, a shared commitment to something greater than their own egos or past hurts. "Yes, honey," Lena replied, kneeling to be at her daughter's eye level. "A different kind of family, but a family." That afternoon, as the sun began its descent on the horizon of Havenwood Creek, the aroma of mulled cider once again filled the square. Not to mark a humiliation, but to celebrate a new beginning. The small town, which had been the stage for so much pain, now witnessed how forgiveness could be more powerful than any revenge. And Lena, watching her daughter run joyfully across the lawn of the square, finally felt that the cycle was complete. She had transformed her pain into growth, her hurt into compassion, her desire for payback into something infinitely more valuable: the ability to offer a second chance, not just to others, but especially to herself.